Hello everybody, welcome to another episode from the DJ Anesh series, bringing you the best in Southeast Asian history. And boy, speaking of history, what a week it has been. Certainly one for the history books. Of course, you all know what I'm talking about. It is KFC's launch of their Pocket BBQ or cheese flavor. Oh man, it will change your life, yo. Of course, I'm talking about the elections, and at this time of recording, it is about, I think, 2 days after the election results were released. And I think I'm still taking some time to make sense of it all and to kind of like coalesce and condense my thoughts on it. I hope that you guys had a wonderful experience going through the process, from the announcement to the campaigning to the results, and kind of like right now we're in the aftermath of it, sense-making kind of period that we're in right now. And the next time round, which 5 years time or 4 years time from now, I think you guys will be voters and part of the electorate, and I hope that a lot of the things that you saw this time round will give you an initial sense or feel, or will inform you about what kind of voter you are going to be, and what kind of political parties you are going to be leaning towards too. Of course, you and we have a good relationship. I think you know where I stand. I don't think my stand has wavered in any way. But again, I don't think my stand is of concern over here. At the end of the day, it's about finding your own voice and your own place in society. So I encourage you to continue to ask questions, to explore. I encourage you to even go for some first-hand experience situations if it's open to you and if it's possible. Just try to get yourself involved in the process if this is something that is of interest to you. And of course, there's no bias or there's no unfairness or injustice over here, no matter where you stand. And I do know some of where you guys stand. It will not have any bearing whatsoever in my relationship with you or in my teaching or in whatever the case is, right? It's just what we live in, which is a democracy. I hope you got a better understanding of what a democracy is like, some of the opportunities, some of the challenges, some of the good and some of the bad. So that's something that I hope that you guys got from this. As we move on, let's see how society takes us and what kind of roles do we play in society as we move forward from here. Speaking of moving forward, we are moving forward on the road to the A-levels. This ship, the SS Asiatic, is sailing into its first test into uncharted waters. Seems menacing, probably is. But this will be our first test as sailors, and let's see how we navigate the currents before us. Today, with this podcast, what I thought I'd do is to provide a bit more guidance and to provide a bit more support in going into these CTs. Of course, I'm not going to give you all the questions itself and things like that, but hopefully with the guidance over here, you would have some greater clarity or some greater direction and prioritization about how you want to prepare for these CTs. Don't be too afraid by the title that I give it over here. It's not meant to be, oh, you guys are going to burn up in flames in these CTs and all that. No, it's not, right? There are three pre-test revisions that I would have. One is right now, which is the pre-CTs revision. And then there will be a pre-prelims revision. And then finally, there will be a pre-A-levels revision. So since it comes in threes, I thought, what better way than to model it after one of my favorite literature texts ever. Is by this poet called Dante. It was back in the day. And the first of he has this series called the Divine Comedy, and the first of which is book number 1, Inferno. After that, it will go on to purgatory or purgatorio, and the last one would be paradise, paradiso. So those kind of, I thought, let's be poetic a bit over here. Yeah. So on that note, why I chose Inferno as well, or this whole divine comedy structure, is because also to give you a sense of indication. Usually for mid-years, I will set a paper that is a bit more challenging. And I hope that you guys would rise to the challenge. It is not out to kill you. I don't think any of the questions, like, you guys won't understand or whatever it is, but I think they are challenging because of the level of consideration that you might need to have in them. And I also don't think that at the other end of the spectrum, I also don't think that they are standard questions. So there is some level of difficulty attached to them. For the source-based question as well, the sources, the questions for the hypothesis, they are pretty standard. There's nothing that you won't understand about a hypothesis, A or B. But the sources that I chose and the topic that I chose, I think that's where the difficulty would lie. So just mentally prepare yourself. Nothing that you can't do, but at the same time, I think you would feel the challenge as well. The paper, and I emphasize this, you repeat after me, everybody. The paper is manageable. Repeat. Oi. I wait for a while. Repeat. The paper is manageable. I can do it. I will rise to the challenge of Mr. Koh's paper because I believe in myself. At the very least, I believe in Mr. Koh who believes in me. Say all those things before you go on. Okay, without further ado, let's go into the lecture itself. Now, I mean, by now, I hope you guys know this, but by the examinable topics over here, the stuff from Team 1, the stuff from Team 2, and the stuff from Team 3. So the noticeable cuts, I've already said before, looking at the Asian financial crisis, I will not test anything on responses and I will not test anything on consequences. So there are no questions that are specific to that. However, if you had listened to the lectures on responses and consequences, you could use some of that in your other topics like economic development or even political stability. So the content is flexible in that way, and if you found something useful, then you can always bring it in. If you didn't listen to those podcasts as of now because you had like other bigger priorities, which I understand, and if you don't include those things, it's okay also. It doesn't really matter at this point in time. So that was the first big cut. Second big cut is from Team 3, where I did state specifically that for interstate tensions and cooperation, I didn't include case studies to do with Konfrontasi and Sabah. Quite obviously, why I didn't include those, because promos, that was the scope. So this time around, I don't have to include them in the scope. And with regards to ASEAN, I will not test ASEAN and the regional economy. So you can kind of leave that out as well. I don't think there's anything to do with AFTA or APEC, that kind of stuff. So, but again, if you want to use those kind of knowledge for other questions or other topics or whatever, please do so. Please bring it in. I'm just saying that there won't be any questions specifically set for those kind of things. Now, as I go through the themes, I'll be giving you guidance, and I will state outright here that when I say I'm going to give you guidance and giving you direction, the comments that I have here are not going to be general comments. These are comments which I think will help you. Okay, I emphasize, these are comments I think will help you in those questions that I had set, and in the SVQ that I set as well. So I'm not going to be giving you outright hints. I'm just going to go through it as it is, but somewhere beneath, like somewhere in whatever I say, is going to be linked to the questions that I set. So I will not tell you where or when. I'm just going to go through as it is, things that I think matter to me, and somewhere or another, those things are going to connect to the questions that you're going to face in the CTs. I don't think you should try to pierce your ears and try to listen out what's he saying. Just take it as it is, I feel, because ultimately all these things matter on a more long-term basis. And just hear it as it is lah. Don't need to pick out and try to decipher or which is he leaning towards to, or like, oh, how come his tone is like much better over here, or how come his tone is like more emphasis over there, okay, that kind of stuff. Try not to do those things. Just take it as it is as we go through the various topics. Okay. Now, for theme 1, okay, question 2 and question 3, those two topics will be tested on theme 1. Now, this is my first, how should I put this? My first concessionary package to you, or this is my first present to you guys. Okay, Santa Claus is here. Ho, ho, ho. Question 2 and question 3 will be on theme 1. Okay, now, here's my first gift to you guys. Question 2 will be a question on political stability. Okay, question 2 will be a question on political stability. Question 3 will be a question on, drumroll, national unity. Okay, so you have one question on political stability and one question on national unity. So out of those two, you can choose one to do. So the natural question now you ask me is, Mr. Koh, like that, can I just spot or can I just study one topic? No, my suggestion is no, you shouldn't. Why? Because I always want you to have a plan B situation. If you specialize in something, that's good strategy, but always have a plan B situation in case you can't do your specialized topic for some reason or another. At least you have a plan B situation. The other thing why I would suggest you study the lesser topic of your choice as well is because what if you can use some information from there in order to help your specialized topic? So what I mean by that is, let's say you are studying political stability, and the question allows you to consider political stability from like a very broad sense lah. So can you bring in elements of national unity to your answer, to your argument? Yeah, probably you can as well. So knowing that little bit, or knowing that baseline bit about national unity, while you don't have to attempt a question on that, you can use that information to help in your specialized topic on political stability. The relationship will work with any topic, vice versa, across any theme as well. The idea here is that in Southeast Asia as well as in IH, a lot of the content, they are not confined within their topics, but they can cross topics as well. So I encourage you to specialize, sure, but always have a plan B situation. Now, on political stability, I'm using the terminology from the syllabus document, and the phrasing over here from the syllabus document is approaches to governance. Now, I really need you all to consider this term governance, what it means, how do you unpack it, and how do you use it in your essays and in your arguments? Because whenever you are going to assess something about governance, you can't just leave the term as it is, right? You need to unpack it, you need to go into its specific components, and then you need to tie your assessments to those components. So issues of governance, for me, breaking it down even further, okay, the next 2 points over there, I'll try to give you some clarity on what can be done with this term governance. So going into the second point over here, political stability and effectiveness of control. Now, political stability, there were many frameworks as to how we could unpack this term. The first framework that I frequently use and I like to use is the idea of when you consider political stability, and especially the term stability, make sure that you consider it from different aspects of society. The first framework that I have is the elite versus the mass considerations. So things to do with political stability at the elite level, meaning the governmental level, and things to do with political stability at the mass level, meaning at the people, at the ground level, at the societal level. So that's one of the big frameworks you can use. And one important relationship I need you all to consider is that what happens at the elite, what happens at the top, it will affect what happens at the ground, at the mass level. Similarly, what happens at the mass level, what happens at the ground level, it will influence what happens at the top as well. Not only have you just experienced this over the past 2 weeks or so, but across Southeast Asia, you've seen such dynamics between the government and the people, and how all these things would factor into the understanding of political stability. So, unpacking political stability, my suggestion as you look at its components, what it does entail, look at the elite level, right? Look at governmental control, look at governmental continuity, how long they are in power and that kind of stuff. At the mass level, look at issues of societal order. Look at the challenges and the oppositions within the country, whether or not they are met or whether or not they succumb to it. So that is for political stability. When you assess effectiveness of control, your idea of effectiveness or ineffectiveness is going to be tied to whether or not they achieve those components in a sustainable manner. So that is unpacking political stability. Just now, when I unpack political stability, I really focus on the term stability, and then I look at the different levels, like the elite and the mass level. If I look at the term political, actually I can have a broad understanding of this term political, because what affects politics is not just politics itself, but what affects politics is also economic development as well as national unity. So this is why I say that sometimes in political stability essays, you can bring in economic development, you can bring in national unity, because these three things will mutually affect one another as well. Usually there is going to be a synthesis of these three things, or there is going to be mutual destruction across these three things. So what happens in the economic development sphere can reflect upon politics. What happens in national unity, dealing with insurgencies or separatism or divide, it can affect political stability as well. So you can see just by this term political stability, unpacking it into elite and mass levels, political unpacking it to include also economics, as well as the social dimension of running a country, the social dimension of governance. Those things are up for you to consider as well. So that's to do with political stability. The other thing to think about in terms of governance is political development. Now, when we talk about development, we are focusing a bit more about the systems and how they are established, how they change over time. So a lot of change and continuity elements, this concept over here with political development. So with political development, we are looking at the establishment of regimes, the evolution of regimes, the collapse of regimes, and maybe even things to do with political culture, how they start out initially and how they change over time as well. So just give you an example. Dominantly speaking, most Southeast Asian countries adopted a form of democracy as their initial mode of governance when they achieved independence. So dominantly speaking, it was like that. You give it a few years later, about a decade later, most of these democracies actually lapsed into authoritarianism. A form of authoritarianism could be civilian authoritarianism, it could be a military dictatorship, it could be just a civilian dictatorship as well. But there is that shift, there is that development over there. And then you push it down even further the time frame. Actually, a lot of these authoritarian regimes went back to democratic forms of rule towards the later part of our time frame. So, there are these systemic changes that occur as part of political development. Alongside this, we have the changes in political culture as well. At the initial part of independence, the dominant political culture across Southeast Asia, I wouldn't say it was with democracy, but I think it was more with patrimonialism, traditional forms of authoritarianism, that kind of stuff. But as you go down the decades, similarly, countries and peoples, they get more and more liberal, and they get more and more pro-democratic. influenced by all sorts of things, but the political culture changes as well. And so whether it's systemic changes in the form of government or the regime itself, or the changes in terms of political culture, you do note that as you go down the timeline, these are things that you would have to consider as part of political development. And the idea here is what prompts this. What are the reasons for political development? What changes it? What moves it down, and so on and so forth. That kind of stuff. So yeah, that's with regards to political development. You can see that the content may more or less be the same, but the focus may be a bit different compared to political stability and assessing effectiveness of control. In terms of focus on this note, you see the fourth point over there: effectiveness versus importance versus suitability. Now these are all question terms that could appear with regards to essay questions in general. You have effectiveness, importance, or sometimes they would say significance, or suitability. Now I just need you all to consider that these things, they would have an impact, they would have an influence on how you would answer the question and what is the focus of your assessment. So I really need you all to pay very close attention to the operative word within the question itself to see which of these terms is being given, and then how does that focus your assessment. So remember, just to give you an example, effectiveness versus importance, right? This is something that I covered before in class. Effectiveness, you're really assessing the levels of success, failure of governments in managing their countries. So it's going to be that kind of framework, like pit against each other. When it comes to importance, however, remember that we can even use negative case studies in order to stress importance. So negative case studies in this sense wouldn't be part of the balance or wouldn't be part of your counter, but in actual fact it might actually be used to reaffirm your argument of the importance of a certain something. So you see, there are certain issues like this that you will need to consider. The last one there on suitability, I think is quite similar to effectiveness, and I think to some degree is quite similar to importance. I would see it as kind of like a fusion of the two, this idea of suitability. But with suitability things, you really need to go down into the features. I think the idea behind suitability questions really requires you to look at the features of the given factor and whatnot, and then to tie it to the context. So the two most important things in suitability questions, you really need to check out the features, whether it is in alignment to the context, whether it meets the context, and maybe the third thing, which is outcomes, what kind of outcomes arises from the alignment or the misalignment. So features, what did I say? Features, context, right? The contextual needs, the situational needs, and then the outcomes. And then you can judge suitability, because here you're making an assessment based on the evidence you have seen in history from the time period, whether or not this form of government is suitable or was suitable, or comparing between two forms of government, like which one was more suitable, that kind of stuff. So a lot of it comes down to the features, whether or not it met the needs, and whether or not they are have successful or negative outcomes. So the last point over there, use of situational context and time. This is something that you'll see across all the slides here today. When you want to argue for effectiveness, importance, suitability, it's always good to bring up the context. Like what is happening at that point in time, what's the severity level, what's the significance of the context that you're bringing in, how does it help your argument of effectiveness? Like, so what I mean by this is that, let's say for instance you have a question and they say that judging effectiveness, right? And says that you want to bring in a point about how the situation in the initial period was so severe and it was so chaotic and it was so urgent and all that, blah blah blah. And you see that despite all these things, governments could still overcome them and lead their countries on a path of development. I mean, to me, that is an even better argument when you paint the difficulty of the context and then you show how governments still manage to overcome it. I feel that that is a really strong argument because it brings in the contextual understanding, and then you continue to run your argument through it rather than you just stating that it was like that at the start and then they did this and then they had these outcomes. You didn't emphasize the severity or the significance or the difficulty of the context. So that's something that I feel you can add in a bit more in order to really bolster your points on effectiveness and importance and suitability. The other thing is about time. So looking at how things change over time, the contextual shifts and all that kind of stuff. Just a note here, if you are running a main framework, on time, your argument framework, right, is on time. Usually your main argument would run based on the longer term assessment. So it will look something like, oh, maybe in the beginning phase it was like this. However, on a longer term assessment, it was the other way. Your main argument, your overall stand would probably lean towards your longer term assessment. Your shorter term assessment would probably just be the balance that you provide, that it was like that at the start. However, on a longer term, on a more dominant assessment, it seems to be the other way. So yeah, that's the use of time as an argument framework, but also as something for you to provide different perspectives across the time period of study. Okay, cool. So that's political stability. I think that cool. If you look very carefully at the image that I put in over here, there's a hidden message in there that tells you what the question is from the I'm just joking. Please, how many of y'all just went to stare at the picture, huh? Come on, you think I so smart, is it? Okay, national unity. For those of you who are specializing in this topic, these are the things for you to kind of take note of. Now, national unity, like same with political stability just now, when we unpacked political stability, there are many different indicators and there are many different components that we needed to unpack out so that we can use them in our arguments, we can use them in our assessments. So when it comes to national unity, there are certain national unity indicators that you will need to know. I mean, there's no running away from this. So national unity indicators that you will need to know include things like, okay, so basically the question here is, how do I know if a country has achieved national unity? Like, what are the things that I'm going to look out for? All right, the first thing is whether or not the country is politically intact. And for that, we call it territorial integrity, right? Whether or not the country is politically and physically intact, whether they are kept together or are they breaking up? Have they broken up? Are they starting to break up? What's the level of threat factor over there in terms of the breakup of the country? So this is more of the physical and political aspect of it. A second indicator we will need to think about is the majority-minority relations. Is it cohesive? Is it harmonious? Or is it disparate? Is it full of suspicion and animosity and hostility and that kind of stuff? What's the attitudes of each of them towards each other? So that's the second thing to consider. The third thing to consider is national identity, right? Is there a common national identity that everyone adheres to and can move forward with? So this national identity, I want to caution you, it doesn't just refer to integration countries. It doesn't just refer to multiculturalism, right? In an assimilation-based country, you can also have common identity that everyone subscribes to. It's just that this common identity is going to be based upon the dominant group's identity, characteristics, and history and experience and all that. But there are case studies which show that even assimilationist-based national identities can work as well and can bring the country forward. So the third indicator here is about national identity. The fourth indicator, and the last one, last of the major ones, I mean, you have more, you can add on more, but the last of the four major national unity indicators. The fourth one is about the degree of conflict within the country. This is also physical, it's also visible, it's also tangible. You are looking at things like insurgency, separatism, rebellions, ethnic strife, ethnic conflict. Basically, all these kind of physical fights that you can see within the country is going to be an indication of national disunity. And if you have an absence of them, if you have a stable situation which has never evidenced, this kind of large-scale ethnic conflict or ethnic strife, then you can link that to national unity as well. So just as we unpack political stability just now we unpack national unity and the various indicators that you will need to consider. The second point over here, the national unity determinants. The idea here is what kind of things do we need to, what kind of elements or what kind of things do we need to consider to account for why a country has national unity or doesn't have national unity. These determinants or these things to consider, right, is like it can be down to human actors or it can be down to circumstances. So when it comes to determinants in terms of actors, I think definitely you got to think about the government and what kind of approach does it employ, and with the approach that it employs, what kind of outcomes arise from that. So primarily, there's the integrationist and assimilationist policies, but there's no hard and fast rule as to integration equals good, assimilation equals bad. There's no such thing. You got to see how the evidence for itself, the context it was in, and then you judge it from there. So definitely you got to consider the governments first. The other actors that you need to consider are the minorities and the majorities themselves. So with the minorities and the majorities, the populations over there, right, you got to consider their attitudes and how that affects national unity. With the minorities, you might even break them down even further, because there are two categories of minorities. We are looking at the immigrant minorities, like the Chinese and the Indians, and then we are looking at the native minorities, which are minorities who have been there all along. It wasn't as a result of immigration. Why I break them down even further is because there's a possibility for me to assess even further differences, even further attitudes and mentalities, even between different groups of minorities, and how that could have affected the level of success of national unity in that country. So in terms of actors, I think those would be things to consider. In terms of things, like other things to consider, I guess you would need to think about the contextual situation. So things to do with the colonial legacy, things to do with the political stability within the nation. All these things I think would matter in affecting the chances of success or the degree of difficulty of the national unity project. So contextual factors like that would also help in explaining why or why not a country has or has not national unity. So these are some determinants. I'm pretty sure there are more, so you can just list down whichever determinants you want to consider and then see what kind of trends and arguments you can form out of that. Fourth point over here, same thing, use of situational context and time. I mean, this is something that I'm going to emphasize through every slide you see over here. Situational context. Remember what I said just now, that assimilation doesn't automatically mean bad, because there are some cases where assimilation is necessary and even successful. But then I must go down into the context to understand what's going on over there. There are some cases where integration may not be successful, and same thing, I have to go down into the context and to understand what's happening over there. So bringing in that kind of contextual understandings can help in your argument. Time as well, like just now, it might have been a situation like this at a certain point in time, but it might have changed, it might have evolved across time, and so you can work that into your argument as well. For the last point over here, categorization of case studies, I do feel that national unity is in terms of the case studies, it is a bit more flexible, or if you want to look at it, it's seen as a bit more grey, except for Singapore and maybe Burma, right? I think those two are quite clear-cut where they stand. But the rest of the case studies actually is quite malleable. You can really use them in any way that you want, and the level of success or whatever or not over there is really all up to you. So there's no hard and fast rule for those other case studies, I feel. So I do need you, for those of y'all who are doing national unity, like specializing in that, I need you to get a good sense of your case studies. That's number one. And then I need you to get a good sense of how you are going to use your case studies. That's number two. So that's something for you to think about. The determinants-based approach here is basically if you are in a situation where you need to group your case studies, then you will know exactly which case studies fall into the more successful band and which case studies fall into the less successful band. So I don't want you all to think about all these kind of things on the spot. Just prepare beforehand. Of course, you can adjust it here and there during the exam itself, but at least think about it beforehand so that you don't think about these kind of things on the spot. A lot of doing well in a history exam has to do with pre-preparing your arguments and pre-thinking your arguments rather than going down to the paper itself and then start to formulate everything. So that's why I'm exposing you all to a lot of like different types of questions, and even with SPQ a lot of different types of hypotheses, because I want you all to get a sense of where you all stand on all these kind of things. So yeah, that's for national unity, and these are the things for you to consider. Now moving on to team 2. Okay, team 2 is going to be question 4 and question 5. Now same thing, my second gift to you, okay, is that for question 4, it is going to be on something on economic development, and question 5 is going to be, drumroll, causes of the AFC. Okay, so question 4 is going to be on economic development, and question 5 is going to be on causes of the AFC. So between these two, you choose one to do lah. Okay. Cool. Now for economic development, these are the things to consider. Once again, we start out with unpacking the term economic development. Like, what is economic development? The essays that I've seen so far, right? One of the key things I want you all to consider is that economic development doesn't equals only growth. Like, if everything is about growth, if everything is about GDP, then it's gonna be like very one-dimensional lah, your essay, and you find yourself going to be repeating a lot of evidence and a lot of indicators and all that. So with regards to economic development, remember the SCOOT? Remember that SCOOT analysis thing that we did last time round? The challenges, the opportunities, the successes, the limitations, all these things, right? I want you to consider them as part of the whole package on economic development and what it means to be development. So development could be something like movement of economies from an unmodernized structure to one that is based on industrialization, that kind of stuff. So even those kind of things are symptoms or symptomatic of development, and you can use them as part of your indicators lah, when you want to judge the progress in economic development. So there are quite a number of things you can unpack from the idea of development, and you can like draw up your own list towards that as well. The determinants of economic development, I think I'll unpack them into the next 2 points over there. There are things to do with actors of economic development, and there are things to do with strategies of economic development. So actors is quite simple, state or non-state. So under state, when we say state, it usually refers to the government, and local governments are like Southeast Asian governments. And then with non-state actors, there are a variety of actors to consider. We have the private sector, we have the immigrant communities, we have the external actors as well, and so the list goes on now with regards to non-state actors. So those two different categories of actors will influence economic development in some way, and I think to make sense of these things, you might need to draw up a complex relationship between, what each of them are responsible for and how do they compare relative to one another. So that's about actors. About strategies, there are things to do with the sectors themselves, right? According to your syllabus document, there are 3 big sectors to consider. The first one is the industrial sector, second one is the finance sector, and the third one is the agricultural sector. I think we can work on that framework provided by your syllabus. But there are other things to consider like the external sector, which is exports of a country, imports as well. And then with regards to finance, we are looking at the banking sector, that kind of stuff. So those have to do with the sectors themselves. Other strategies, I think one of the big things that we did discuss was ideology. And so when you see ideology in an economic development question, I think usually it will refer to economic ideology. So it's more or less going to be one of the 3 which is the capitalist type of economies, the socialist type of economies, and then the hybrid or the third way type of economy. So for that, for that it's more about like understanding how important the framework of an economy is. What do the various prescriptions from the ideology provide for the economy, but at the same time also like what kind of limitations are out there. With the limitations, is it because of the ideology itself, or is it because of governmental mismanagement, or is it because of maybe an external circumstance, things like that. So when it comes into ideology or that's not the sectors, right? Industrial, agriculture, and finance. I think again, what would be a good thing to do would be to go down into the features and to see exactly what they provide, what they prescribe for the economy, and to then judge the level of importance arising from those kind of things lah. So same thing like just now, one of the other questions in political stability. You need to go down into the features and to tease them out, and then to see, to draw a relationship, a causal relationship between what they provide and what's the impact, and things like that. So same thing over here, the last thing here, use of situational context and time. Things might change over time, and of course you must look at the context itself. As you can see, I'm struggling quite a bit in this theme as to what I can say without really giving you like huge indications. So I think that more or less I've covered what I needed to say for this theme currently, and I don't really want to say anymore because I'm afraid that I might give up or give too much indication what it is. But so these are the things to consider for economic development, and I shall end this topic here. The last one is on causes of AFC. I think this one is already scoped lah, so there's no big like mystery as to what's coming out for this. I think the difficulty in AFC essays is trying to strike a balance between presenting economic information but versus trying to construct historical explanations. I think I did put that in. Yeah, okay, the 4th point over there. So this one, try to be careful not to rely too much on economic explanations. At the end of the day, when you are judging between the various factors and what causes the AFC, I'm really looking into more important things to do with history, like the causal relationships, the significance, the criteria, all these things. Okay, let's look at the categories here. Structure versus immediate, internal versus external, or even if they give a single factor. Like all these things will contribute to the AFC. So all these things, guys, have unique importance. All these things have unique contribution. All of them will contribute to the AFC. That's why they are factors in the first place. The challenge over here right now is to acknowledge unique importance and then to compare them against other uniquely important factors, but in a relative manner. So what you're really trying to do here is to assert that some factors are more important, more contributive compared to others. Whichever framework you see over here that you want to use or whatever, like it's up to you. But the same principle applies in terms of the causal relationships and the use of criteria to weigh the relative importance. I don't think I need to go too much into like structure versus immediate. We've had a whole tutorial on that, or actually more than that, more than one tutorial on that. So structural factors, looking at what's happening within the production models, looking at what's happening in finance, looking at what's happening in wherever. The idea here is to see the long-standing problems and the fact that they are very extensive across the economy. Immediate ones are more closer towards 97 itself, and a lot of it has to do with investor speculation at that point in time. So that's for the first one. Second one, internal versus external. I think quite similar, you can tell, but maybe with regard, okay, internal, I'm pretty sure like it kind of correlates to the things we were looking at just now. What did I say? The production models, the finance sector itself, governmental cronyism, right? That's a big thing, right? And and other things to do with the internal structural decay within Southeast Asian economies leading up to 97. Now, external wise, I think that I wouldn't, how do I put this? I wouldn't immediately and only equate external factors to investor speculation. I know that probably is going to be like the biggest one, but it is not that. External requires you to consider other things that are happening in the external environment as well, right? The big thing that is happening, of course, I've emphasized this in class quite a bit, is about the post-Cold War liberalization, the opening up of economies, and trying to encourage that sense of interdependence across nations. So you want to call it liberalization or you want to call it globalization, I think more or less the same idea is there, that it focuses on the opening up of economies, it focuses on the forging of economic relationships, it really focuses on the idea of interdependence across nations in terms of this economic dimension. So there's that huge thing over there, and then there's like other things to do with external, like let's say like the more ad hoc events are like the appreciation of the USD, or like the depreciation of the Chinese yuan, or the Japanese recession, what's else? Oh, the growth of China and India. Things like this matter. And on this last note, like let's say the growth of China and India, or like all these other things, right? Like it really brings about to light that with this idea of interdependence, right? With this idea of liberalization and globalization, it does offer a lot of opportunity, but at the same time, it does offer a lot of trappings and vulnerability as well. The degree of exposure that economies are now opened up to, with regards to the fluctuating cycles of the economy, of the global economy, the fact that it now has to compete, with bigger competition that are like rising up, like developing nations like China, India, that kind of stuff. So when you consider external and internal, both of them have pros and cons, in a sense, or rather I should say, both of them have opportunities and trappings, and how much of that leads into the course of the AFC is something to be judged as well. The last one here is about single factor. So I may not give... Whoa. That's a very dangerous way to phrase things. Wait, let me rephrase that a bit. But let's say, hypothetically, for instance, if you were not given any one of these 4 categories at the top, structural, immediate, internal, external, there could be a possibility that the given factor in itself is something even more specified. So let's say the specified factor could be governmental cronyism, or like it could be investor speculation. Rather than give you a category of factors, they give you, I say they, not me, they give you a specified factor. So that's something that can happen as well. But even if that's the case, honestly, it doesn't really make a difference. You just got to keep comparing with the other specified factors that you know, and just talk about this single factor for the bulk of your essay and assess it over there. Yeah, so cool. That's for the AFC things for you to take note of. Again, the scope is set is on the causes of AFC, no big mystery over there. But then with the other factors, there are things for you to unpack and to consider as well. Okay, now for SPQ. SPQ, I think with regards to my advice, it's more about skills, I would say. Thus far, how do I say this? Thus far, the past 3 A levels, the SPQ topic that have been set at the A levels, right? No school has been able to really successfully predict what is going to come out. So for me to offer predictions and that kind of stuff, I don't think it's going to be very useful for you lah. So with regards to SPQ, I think what I will focus on more is the skills that can be applied to any question that you're given. So as long as you showcase these skills, then you'll be credited lah. Just some common. I don't want to go through the basic stuff lah, because I'm not basic like that. But I'm sure you all know the basic stuff. I just want to go through some common things that kept appearing and maybe just a good reminder and a good reinforcement. The first one is on the argument sequencing. You don't have to start with the support sources all the time or whatever. Some of you all have this idea that I must do the support sources first. No, you just have to see which side of the argument you're leaning towards to, and then based on that side, then you just run that argument first lah. So let's say for instance, if you choose the support argument, my suggestion is that the support evaluation, it must come first. If you choose the challenge argument, then your challenge evaluation must come first. Why is this so? It's because number one, you want to establish your main argument first. And secondly, with your main argument established, you can use it to CR against the lesser argument. You can further debunk the things in the lesser argument with CR. So that's the opportunity afforded to you by argument sequencing correctly, right? Based upon which side of the argument you are leaning towards to. This is really, really important. If I see anybody has the comment AR sequencing on your script, I'm gonna minus 200 marks from your script immediately. Second is argument prioritization. Now obviously we know that between inference and evaluation portions, which one should be prioritized? Okay, of course it's going to be evaluation portions. Within the paragraph itself, I also need to have some prioritization also. In the inference paragraph, evidence quoting is important or paraphrasing is important, but make sure that you don't rely too much on that. The inference paragraph is for you to do your inferences, not for you to quote evidence and think that that explains things for you, right? The important thing is for you to make sense of the evidence. That is your inference, that are your explanations, right? Always explain it and link it to the hypothesis. That's the more important part of the inference paragraphs. Going into the evaluation paragraphs, remember that there are 2 steps for evaluation checks. The first one is provenance checking, the second one is claim checking. With provenance checking, you can do it as collectively as you can as possible. Let's do that first. But if there are further explanations or there are further singular things that you need to pick out from the provenances, do pick them out and do explain them in full. Don't be lazy about the explanations. I know we have said things like, this is an academic source, it is objective because blah blah blah, it has historical. Yeah, I know it's damn sian to write all these things right now because you guys have written it 10,000 times already. But now is the exam. Write it out in full. Don't be lazy about the explanations of your provenance. Go into it in full. Link them to reliability. Link them to utility. Okay. So collective provenance checks as much as you want. As much as you can. And then after that, try to see if there's any other things you need to explain individually from any of the sources before you go into your claims checking portion. For your claims checking portion, make sure that it's done. Ultimately, in an SPQ, you're not just there to prove which set of sources is stronger than the other. You're trying to prove which set of claims, which perspective is stronger than the other. That's the ultimate goal of SPQ. Not the sources themselves, but the claims they represent in relation to the hypothesis. So you can't just say something like, these sources by provenance have been proven reliable, therefore their claims are reliable. No, it doesn't work that way. You need to have two checks. Check the provenance, and then after that go and check the claims, UCR, UCK, whatever it is. Make sure your claims, when you're checking them, they are specified. Make sure that they're explicitly shown so I know which claims you are checking, so that as a marker, I can follow where you guys are going with that. So a lot of it is direction setting in your paragraphs. Make sure that things are explicit rather than implicit. Make sure that there are explanations rather than implicit associations over there. With the use of CK, there are two types of CK you can use: explanatory CK or supplementary CK. Explanatory CK is you identified a trend across the sources, they point out something or whatever, and you are seeking to provide CK in order to explain this trend or to explain why this trend was shown, or whatever it is. But basically it's explain. The second type of CK is supplementary CK. For instance, if you see an event or even a trend in the sources and you have other information that you want to bring in to confirm that this trend continues or this trend doesn't continue, or there's something to consider alongside this event or this trend, bring in this other supplementary CK in that case. Now, if you see the topic and then you don't know, like, oh my god, like what supplementary CK can I use? I don't have anything in mind. It's okay. Don't panic, right? Don't panic. Like, just how my voice is just not stuttering right now. Just don't panic. Don't panic at all. What I will need you to do is just rely on explanatory CK. Try to explain, as much as you can, the trends that you see in as what the sources provide. And one of the big things I always stress is that when it comes to SPQ, and especially with ASEAN, I mean, if we have an interstate conflict itself, like solely based on that, then okay lah, we don't need to talk about ASEAN and ASEAN Way anymore. But barring that, you can always bring in ASEAN Way kind of information in order to explain certain things that you see in the source. So with regards to the ASEAN Way, this is something that I feel is the principle of ASEAN, their chief approaches and all that kind of stuff. So you can tell that this is going to be able to be applied through many contexts and all that kind of stuff. With the ASEAN Way, I think I've met some of you all in tutorials or in consults, and I did mention that when you want to consider what is possible within the ASEAN Way, make sure that you even know what are the components of the ASEAN Way. There's the C&C, consensus and consultation. So the consensus seeking approach, the consultative approach. Then you have the style of diplomacy, which is usually referred to as informal diplomacy. Then you have things that are more linked towards international organizations, like the respect of sovereignty and the respect of international law. And then alongside that, you have non-use of force. These are things very connected to the UN. And then the last one, which I feel is the most controversial one, but yet it seems to be the defining principle of ASEAN Way for ASEAN, is non-interference as a principle. So non-interference, the idea that you cannot interfere or you should not interfere in the domestic affairs in another country and that kind of stuff. With all these things, especially with such a controversial thing like non-interference, I would in terms of preparation, I would need you guys to do a organizer or mind map or whatever it is, right? But think about the pros and the cons of each of these things. Why does it serve the organization well? Why does it handicap the organization? So do it as content, like just draw up each column and all that. And then when you draw up all your stuff already for each of these things, then you just got to think to yourself, or look at the information that you have and then decide on which side you are leaning more towards to. We have to acknowledge that each of these things has their limitations, and we have to acknowledge that each of these things have their strengths and their opportunities as well. So in that sense, the final decision lies with you lah, and what you intend to do with the information that you have consolidated. But I do advise all of you in preparation for the A levels, to prepare these kind of things. And of course, if you can start this thing now, all the better lah, right? Because, you know, we're on the road to the A levels, and, you know, CTs is the first, and why not, you know, prepare this as part of your preparations for the CTs as well, since you're going to do it for the A levels anyway. Yeah, so these are the things that I would need you to consider for the SPQ. Cool. The last one that I have for you is just question types kind of things. You may see, you know, different question types, not questions, but like different question types that are appearing. The structure of the question, the form of the question, it differs. And I just wanted to cover some final notes as to what should be done or what could be done when you see this kind of thing. So the first one is two-factor comparison. Like, these are questions, right, where in the question itself there are two factors identified, and they expect you to directly compare these two factors against one another. There are two things to note from this. Number one, the focus of the essay must be a direct competition between these two factors. By that, ideally you shouldn't bring in a third factor. If you have a third factor and you really want to bring it in, it should be housed under either one of the two given factors. Because if you emerge an argument that finally says that, oh, actually a third factor is the most important, or the third factor is the most whatever, then that's off topic already. Because you want that direct competition between the two factors. So that's number one. Number two, with these kind of questions, right, it's best to maintain the consistency of comparison throughout the entire essay. That means to say, right, that your TSs have to be structured comparatively, where every paragraph sets up a comparison on a certain point or a certain criteria between these two factors that you see. That means to say that these two factors will be in competition throughout all your paragraphs. That to me is the best kind of essays that can be gotten out from a two-factor comparison question. The second type of question is single factor questions. Now, if you see a single factor question given, that means to say that the focus of the essay is an assessment on this single factor. So the bulk of it, every single paragraph, it must end up with an assessment on this given single factor that you have. Is there a possibility to bring in other factors? Yes, you can. But you only bring in other factors, other considerations, in order to confirm something about this single factor. So the idea here is that you can bring in other factors, but by the end of those paragraphs or whatever, it should be related back to this single factor that was given in the question. So that maintains the focus, and that gives you another argumentative dimension where you are not just seeking to confirm the single factor by itself, but you're seeking to confirm the single factor not only by itself, but in relation to other factors as well. I think those essays will be the best kind of essays when you are supposed to assess one given factor. So including both of them, but the key thing here is that your focus must be the assessment on this single factor. Okay? The third question type here, things to do with importance, significance, effectiveness, suitability. As I mentioned just now in the political stability portion, these terms matter, and these terms would set the focus for what your argument is going to be on, and it also helps to give you more understanding about how you can use your case studies in order to answer whichever questions here and whichever different focus that you're given. So do pay some attention to these operative words within the question itself, and then structure your essay based on that focus given by the operative question. And then the last one over here is those questions like, why did some governments achieve and others not? Why were some governments successful and others not? Or why were some governments this and others not? Why were some nations this and others not? Why were some, okay? This thing here is quite like the first it's quite like the first point over here, the two-factor comparison thing. This one is in itself is also comparative by nature. That means to say that the same principle applies. The more consistent the comparison is across the essay, the better the essay would be. That means to say that your TSs have to be structured such that they encompass both the more successful case studies and the least successful case studies based on certain determinants. So that means to say that this question type, right, focuses on that determinants-based approach, where maybe your TSs could be structured or formatted in such a way to reflect upon a determinant that distincts out the more successful case studies against the least successful case studies across the entire essay. So there are many determinants to consider, many points of comparison to consider. But same thing here, if you receive this kind of question, then the best approach would be to keep the comparison as consistent as possible. I just realized that as I was talking through this slide, that there are 4 question types that I've identified over here. This one I hold my hand to my heart and I promise you that I didn't like give you all 4 because there are 4 questions out there and that kind of stuff. In fact, just take it as I've forgotten what my 4 questions are. And I just thought of 4 different common essay frameworks, question types, and I just put them on here. So don't read too much into this. But yeah, just take it as it is. As I said at the start, like if you receive any one of these question types, then that's the kind of approach that you should take for that. Yeah, I think I'm done actually. And again, I just want to reinforce the idea that right from the beginning in J1, I did tell you all this already. I will continue to reaffirm it. I do have high hopes for your batch. I feel that you're a batch that can really be pushed, and I think that you all will emerge stronger as the days go by. The paper, I emphasize once again, it is manageable. It's not set to kill you. I believe you can do it. I believe also that you will be challenged by it. But that's the kind of steel and iron that I need you guys to have. Get that composure, trust yourself, get that clarity, and then start writing. Okay? There's still a journey forward. This is the first major test on that journey, and I just need you guys to try your best to allow for both you and I to get a greater clarity on where you guys are at this stage and how I can help you going forward and how you can help yourself going forward. So trust in you, trust in yourself, composure. Okay, don't panic. Whatever the situation. Again, it's not a paper out there to kill you. So have that composure, and then when you write, just make sure that you plan and make sure that you answer the question. Okay, so these are the pieces of advice that I have to offer you for now. There'll be more as we come into prelims and the actual A-levels itself and stuff like that. Oh, I'm crying already. Okay, DJ Anesh out.